Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The government department's failure to spend budget allocations has come under fire in Parliament. Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Mmusi Maimane, has bemoaned the return of money to National Treasury that's due to underspending. He's labelled it as a criminal act. We're now joined by Mmusi Maimane, the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations. A very good evening to you, Mmusi. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps first things first, let's talk a little bit about your role and, of course, what you set out to do with this committee, just to really just give us a level of understanding on the bigger picture.
To fellow South Africans, I mean, I think any government that gets together tables a budget, and the job of the Appropriations Committee is to ensure that ultimately that money is allocated properly. It gives expression to the priorities of that government. And then the long-term issue is about making sure that we give oversight to each of the government spends. So it's actually a very privileged role, because even today, as we were passing the Appropriations Bill, which is the law that empowers how budgets are divided, you get to know effectively that when we give so much money to healthcare, do we get the outcomes, and can we give our oversight to the Department of Health to ensure that not only do we meet the outcomes that are set out, but we in fact make sure that no money is wasted in that regard. And so this is the job of the committee, and it also has powers given in the legislation to be able to make budget recommendations going into the next cycle, as we listen to the public, who can turn around and say to us, actually, we think more money must be spent in ECDs or in programs that prevent TB, etc., to ensure that we can give that input back in preparation for next year's budget.
Today, you labelled the underspending factor as a criminal act, and surely we would now imagine that compromises the oversight role played by Parliament with that underspending by government departments.
No, undeniably. You know, South Africa's faces a number of challenges, of which every rand that is allocated needs to achieve what its intended outcome is. And it must be able to, if the intended outcome is to say, let's educate more children, when money is sent back, this is, for me, an absolute insult to those objectives, because what it means is that there were children who weren't getting educated, etc. In this particular instance, we can look at an issue like NSFAS, which as an argument has now returned over 500 million rands, whereas we've got students who are not eating, who are not able to get into university. That, to me, is criminal. You've got over 2,000 municipalities, or 200 municipalities, I beg your pardon, who are dysfunctional. And these municipalities effectively get money sent to them, but return it. That's streets not having potholes filled, that's lights not coming on, that's water not being reticulated. That is basic service delivery is not brought forward. And therefore, we cannot on one level bemoan the fact that we've got limited resources, but we on one level bemoan that, but on another level ignore the fact that even when we dispense some of those limited resources, some of them come back to us, to the National Treasury. And therefore, I think that, to me, the way going forward, if we're going to achieve an inclusive growth as South Africa creates jobs, three priorities are important. The first one is that we've got to fix energy. We've got to make sure that the logistics work. We've got to fund for infrastructure and pay small businesses on time. It's a fight that I will continue to fight and will monitor across all departments. The second is we've got to make sure that the government departments work better and have got competent people to dispense of that budget. And then lastly, we've got to manage our debt. South Africa is spending already one of its biggest budget items is on debt servicing costs. And so we're a bit like a government who's borrowing just to pay your day-to-day expenses, rather than borrowing to be able to build things that you can create a return on. And so by being able to grow an economy, we can ensure that we begin to deal with that third aspect of debt.
As you make mention of the importance of having competent people to dispense of this money, I mean, one governance expert I was speaking to this evening, Dr. Tim Maike, spoke about the concerns around poor strategic planning, that it's all very well to have this money sent back, but it points to a major concern that there is no quality strategic planning, and that in itself will have a ripple effect on the lives of ordinary people, affecting their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think even beyond the idea of just strategic planning, already we are clear about what are some of the government's objectives. But what happens post-fact is that those objectives need to be translated into each department's annual performance plans so that you align budgets to that. When you look at the National Development Plan, for example, only 45% of the objectives were then put into annual performance plans, with only 25% ticked off as completed. Now, that tells you it's not just having, it's an inability for us to be able to translate goals into tangible plans. The second is, I think it's about prioritization. More than anything, if everything is a priority, then nothing is. And that's my words back to the president was to say it's good that we have 12 priorities that are articulated in the opening of Parliament address. But if you remember, during the World Cup in 2010, we focused on building stadia, building infrastructure, and we were able to achieve a nation that was focused on delivering those things with measurable timelines to say stadiums will be completed by this time, roads will be completed by this time, etc. Now we need those centralized goals, and one of the proposals I've made even to the presidency and certainly to the Minister of Finance is that as South Africa transitions from a coal-intensive industry to more renewable energies, that could be a crucial focus, because what that does is that it forces all of us to say, how do we beneficiate minerals? How do we keep the lights on so that we've got enough energy to do that? How do we fix logistics so that goods can move in and out, import and export? And then ultimately, how do we create a value chain where more people can participate in the economy? This is a time for urgent action, and part of the appropriation bill that was tabled today, whilst we've inherited it from the 6th administration, is to learn some crucial lessons so that when we go into the 7th administration and the tabling of a new budget in February next year, all of these objectives are given effect through plans and to ensuring that there's actually proper management to be able to deliver those plans.
Today we saw the new Minister of Public Works going on a site visit to the Parliamentary Precinct repair project, and there's a lot of talk around budgetary and appropriations matters there too. What role will you be playing in that regard?
No, ultimately, Parliament has voted over the midterm budget expenditure framework that has been given over 2 billion rand for that particular expensive program. So our committee will certainly be inviting Parliament to come and account on the expenditure over that. And secondly, ensuring that that is the best use of South Africa's money. We cannot deny the fact that democracy is at the center, and therefore it's important to have a well-functioning Parliament. But how do we make sure that not only do we compensate for the repair of the building, but we make sure Parliament is more cost effective over the long run so that we eliminate wasteful expenditure. So as an appropriations committee, I'll certainly be setting up a meeting not only with the Department of Public Works, but with Parliament itself to be able to ensure that there's accountability and oversight over that funds, make sure there's no wasteful expenditure, but then over a long period of time, this is a sustainable project for South Africa's democracy. And I think it'll be a massive achievement for the 7th administration. Our job as an appropriations committee is to provide the necessary oversight so there's no waste in the midst of that.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Mmusi Maimane, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, just weighing in on the role of his committee and, of course, bemoaning the return of underspending to the National Treasury.